Have you ever thought that your final moments could keep repeating themselves? If you were suddenly stuck in a never-ending loop where you were destined to repeat the same moments over and over again, how would you respond? Forever in this tale, a group of friends found themselves caught in a time loop on New Year's Eve, from which they would never be able to break free. The 12 chimes did not herald a new beginning, but rather an end. This is the last chimes narrative. The Janes' home was bustling with activity. Dozens of people had gathered for the New Year's Eve celebration. As everyone excitedly awaited the 12 chimes, which would signal the end of one year and the start of another, there was a lot of laughter and excitement in the air. Music, lights, and the sounds of people talking among themselves filled the main living room. As though its existence were not totally normal, Lucas found himself gazing at the ancient wall clock that ticked erratically. It was an old clock, the type that may be found in dark wooded old homes that had presumably seen more tales than anyone could count. Have you heard how strange it sounds? Looking at the clock, Lucas said, "It makes this weird noise sometimes, like it's not marking time correctly." Emma, his companion, gave him a tense smile. Lucas is constantly searching for oddities. Even though it's only an old clock, there seems to be a shift in the house's vibe, as if something is off, even if nobody seems to notice. The celebration went on, with fireworks lighting up the sky outside. No one had anticipated that this night's countdown would not mark the passing of time in the Yasin house in the usual manner. Everyone was anticipating the ringing of the bells, which would mark the end of one year and the start of a new cycle. And Lucas couldn't stop watching the clock as the seconds passed. However, this was incorrect. A chill went through the room as Lucas thought. But before he could say anything, the first chime in the house sounded. It wasn't your typical chime, which always sounds forward. Instead, it sounded backward. At first, everyone assumed it was a technical glitch, an auditory illusion, or maybe a ruse to trick them. But the laughter subsided with the second chime. Few people in the group knew Thomas, a middle-aged man who vanished without a trace. It wasn't as though he had left or used a trick. Rather, he just stopped existing. People stared around in confusion, unsure if this was a dark joke, but no one was laughing. Then the second chime rang, and another person vanished with it. Emily, Lucas's close friend, was there when it happened. There were no shouts or attempts to flee, just a gap in the air. Panic had already started to spread when someone yelled. As though the clock was in charge of something much more sinister than time, the bells continued to chime one after another. Lucas made an effort to relax and search for a rational explanation, but the fear in his chest was intensifying. Another guy disappeared when the clock struck the third chime. David, they looked at one another. Emma's boyfriend was gone. She attempted to yell his name in horror for a brief while, but it was in vain. He disappeared like the rest, and the cycle resumed as mayhem swept through the house. Lucas became aware that there was a troubling pattern to the disappearances. Time seemed to bend in on itself with each new chime, as if they were caught in a never-ending cycle. Nobody knew what was going on or how to stop it, so panic grew. Screams filled the room as people frantically fled in all directions, searching for a way out. But no matter how hard they tried, the doors would not open. There was no way out. Time was frozen at that instant. Each chime of the clock grew louder than the one before it. Shadows started to move over the floor as the room grew darker. Lucas noticed how the few people who were left were frantically attempting to understand the unthinkable. In the face of mounting anguish, Emma held onto his arm for solace. "Lucas, what's going on and why are we experiencing this?" she cried. Lucas felt that everything he knew was crumbling and that time was running out of control, but he had no solutions. Once more, the clock struck, trapping us. Lucas trembled as he looked around and saw the shadows of the people who had vanished moving around them and observing them in a mirror's reflection. The chimes had become a curse rather than merely music. It was as though someone else was torn from the world with each ring, leaving them empty and as though they had never been there. Emma and the few people who were left became panicked, but they were powerless to stop it. The clock continued to run backwards, and another person disappeared every second. Lucas fled to the windows when the fourth chime sounded, attempting to break the glass to get out. But everything seemed to fall apart. There was no escape. As though the house itself were coming to life, the walls were stretching, bending, and rising like monsters. The clock in the shadows slithered across the corners. It never stopped ringing, signaling each terrifying moment. With each fresh chime, someone else vanished. Time no longer made sense, so when the final chime rang, Lucas, the survivors were unable to determine how many minutes or hours had elapsed. The survivors looked around and realized that they were no longer in the same place or house. The walls had grown darker and colder, and the shadows were moving with terrifying speed. Emma and the few people who were left fell to their knees. The room was empty, the clock was still ticking, and there was no sound left. But the sense of terror persisted. The house had turned into a silent shell, and the clock had stopped telling time. But the sense of dread persisted. Emma muttered as she saw their friends' bodies appear all around them. But they were different. They were shadows, echoes of their former selves. Lucas attempted to speak, but his voice sounded as if the darkness were consuming sound itself. They had been caught in that last minute of the year by something, and now they were destined to live it again and again and again. Resignation replaced the anxiety when the final bell rang once more. Emma came to the realization that she and the others were caught in a vicious circle from which they would never be able to break free. When the clock struck 12, make sure you're not near anything you can't control. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like comment on what you thought and subscribe for more terrifying tales at Pacto Tenoso. The clock had started again, and with it, the horror was unleashed once more. The house was now empty, remained a hollow echo of the past, and the clock suspended in time continued its task of returning those trapped in the last minute of the year, doomed to disappear repeatedly. No one knew if they would ever escape that cycle or if they would simply be forgotten, absorbing every repetition of time with no end. The gloomy tales never stop. They are just waiting to be recounted. The next story. Have you ever pondered what would happen if you suddenly understood that you were just a shadow, an illusion of something that no longer exists one night during a celebration? Imagine that the year's most anticipated night, Christmas Eve, becomes a perverse game of fate in which neither death nor time have any influence. What started off as a straightforward holiday meal with family and friends turns into a supernatural experience. We're going to examine a narrative today about a meal that shouldn't have occurred, yet somehow everyone was invited. Welcome to the dinner of the uninvited. What if everything you knew and believed to be true fell apart before your very eyes? On a chilly Christmas Eve, a group of friends got together at an old house on the outskirts of town. The house had been painstakingly repaired and appeared like the ideal place to spend the night because of its weathered wooden walls and enigmatic atmosphere. No one could have predicted what was going to happen, and no one knew that the evening would turn into something far darker than they could have ever imagined. The table was set perfectly with golden candles and elegant plates that reflected a warm light, and the smell of turkey and freshly baked bread filled the air. The guests, surrounded by laughter and jokes, settled into their seats, grateful to spend the evening with good company. As the evening went on, something started to feel off. At first, a slight discomfort that was difficult to pinpoint exactly one of the guests. A peculiar mist began to gather in the corners of the room, as if the house itself was breathing, and Sarah noted that the clock on the wall seemed to be moving slower than usual. She looked around to see if anybody else had noticed, but her companions were too busy enjoying the dinner. Sarah made an effort to get rid of the uneasiness she was experiencing, but as the minutes went by, the feeling that she was stuck in something with no way out intensified. Everyone appeared to be happy and energetic, but something didn't add up. Nobody appeared to be getting older or changing. It was as though time had stopped in the night, which could only mean that something was seriously wrong. The candlelight abruptly flashed, and the clock's tone transcended background noise. Sarah saw that nobody was speaking and that everyone was just staring at one another as though they were discussing some sinister idea they didn't want to discuss. At that moment, one of them, with a pale face and a quivering body, Peter rose from the table. "Does anyone else have this feeling?" he muttered. Although nobody answered right away, it was clear from the looks on other people's faces that something was going on. The room started to seem cold. Even though the windows were closed, the wind was still squeezing in between the gaps, and the mist in the corners seemed to grow stronger, darkening the air as people tried to make sense of what was going on. Sarah got to her feet and went to the window. She was frozen in place by the scene outside when she peeked out. There was nothing but darkness and complete emptiness. No snow, no lights from the nearby homes. She immediately turned back to her friends, but as she did, something had changed. The faces of the others were now strange, as though their bodies were present, but their souls had vanished, and time had stopped. But they were still there, trapped in an incomprehensible dinner. The wind didn't carry the sounds of the city, only the echo of something distant, like a wail that drifted through the air. We are trapped here in a party that never ends, and we are the ghosts of past celebrations, condemned to repeat this night forever. The woman at the far end of the table, whose face was both familiar and strange at the same time, said in a quiet voice with an unnerving calmness. No one could answer, and no one understood how this was possible. Sarah's legs were immobile, but her heart was pounding. The woman went on. Every Christmas Eve, we come here, sit down, eat, drink, and we never leave because we never left, which made her body quiver. The horror had started to penetrate into the hearts of the others, who gazed at her with vacant eyes, unable to comprehend. Something stopped Peter from getting to his feet. As though the house itself were groaning, an odd sound started to fill the space. The lights suddenly went out, and the room was completely silent. Everyone was standing in the same spot when the lights came on, but the mood had changed. Just a few moments ago, the dishes were full of food, but suddenly they were empty. The warmth from the lamps seemed to have disappeared, and the air felt heavy. You can't escape. No one can, the enigmatic woman said, as Sarah, bathed in cold perspiration, attempted to ask a question. We will always be here. Why do you assume that every year all of your memories disappear? Because what you perceive to be your life is actually merely a reflection of who we were. The group fell farther and more into an abyss of misery as the hours went by. They were stuck in that supper, unable to move forward or backward, and there was no way out or way to end the loop. Each year, new faces and visitors showed in, but they all joined in on this mob celebration. They were trapped in that interdimensional zone, unable to escape the agony of Rel's night that went nowhere because time had not let them to depart once death had claimed them. The memories of Sarah's life before this night started to fade like mist in the wind. She couldn't recall her family or her life before this evening. She only knew that she was trapped, that the only way out seemed to be to accept the reality of her fate. But deep down inside, Sarah fought to find a glimmer of hope. However, that small glimmer of hope was quickly extinguished when the woman who had revealed the truth slowly stood up and walked toward the table. There's no way you can escape, she said with an empty smile on her face. You are the uninvited, the ones who should never have come, but for some reason you were dragged into this place. There's no turning back. With those words, the night continued, relentless, eternal, like an unending nightmare. The uninvited's dinner was always crowded with guests who never left, and even though they couldn't recall how they got there, they were certain that if they ever believed this to be a lie, the reality was far worse, and they were destined to be a part of an unending tale. Have you ever had the impression that your life is simply a never-ending cycle with no end in sight? Remember to subscribe for more eerie stories like this one, and comment with your thoughts if you liked it. Here at Pacos Tembroso, where the shadows are always waiting for us, I'll see you in the upcoming video.